We're here for a second session with Father Peter Vu of Kentwood, Michigan. Interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, now in our previous session, we covered your life in Vietnam from the time you were born in 1970 until the time when you managed to get out of Vietnam as a teenager. So was that in 1980 or
86.
86.
Yes.
So yeah, so you're teenager, 86.
Yes.
Okay, and that took several tries to get out on a boat, and then once on the boat, they had to get through a storm, and then pirates, and then finally a South Korean tanker came by and picked up the people from the boat. Now, before we pick up the story, I want to check up on a couple of things from the early part of your life back in Vietnam. And one of them was, when you left Vietnam, did you know any English?
Mm-hmm. One of the blessings for me and the communist education system is that it has the core curriculum. And that's something that I appreciate, but then also I contrast it with the way when I come to America here. But one of the subjects in the core curriculum was foreign language. And I myself, for one reason or another, was able to get assigned to the group that took English class. Mm-hmm. I have other friends that were split up from us when we got to 10th grade. The language core curriculum and the language, foreign language, was really intense. So some of us were split. Some were switched to French class, the group. Mm-hmm. Others switched to Russian. A couple other languages that they asked us to do was Spanish, and I think maybe German.
Okay, but not Chinese?
For some reason, not Chinese. Now, I grew up in the area, they call that Chalon. Mm-hmm. It's a miniature of Hong Kong.
Right.
And so there was a lot of Vietnamese with the Chinese descent. Mm-hmm. So I remember, venturing to that area, and I said, are these Vietnamese? I could pick up the words, but in terms of dialogues and all that, understanding what they're talking about is different. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like, Italian can pick up a few words from Spanish.
Right.
So the same like that. So I think my uncles who got to graduate school to study in the seminary, that was one of the subjects. Chinese was one of the subjects, partly because of being a missionary. Mm-hmm. So we would have to take Chinese along with, let's say, another foreign language, or Chinese philosophy for that matter. Mm-hmm. So for us, for some reason, and I think you can see, it's interesting you pointed out that you can see the dichotomy between the Vietnamese communists and the Chinese communists. Mm-hmm. During the Vietnam War, obviously, without the Chinese communists, the Vietnamese communists could not succeed. Mm-hmm. But you can see that after that, the Vietnamese communists began to split.
Right.
However, for some reason, it still tried to get connected with the Russian, mm-hmm. back in the USSR. Right. And so, so we didn't have to pick up Chinese for some reason, but people who live along the border and all that, they speak fluent Chinese, okay. Vietnamese, I mean.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that was a question I had. Now, also, are there any particular things, aspects of your life in Vietnam that you forgot to mention before that you'd like to bring in now?
Well, I think let me just say a couple words first about the language. Take English, for example. We know about vocabulary, grammar, all that, but in terms of dialogue, it was difficult for us. I mean, so we, believe it or not, we try it out with visitors, and some of them came from East Germany or Russian. Now, imagine trying to learn the language through another party. So I think, obviously, without needless to say, I mean, our accent was messed up. But until later on, when American finally normalized with Vietnam, we didn't have a lot of English or American whom we can try that out. So I think that's one thing about the language. I remember when we left on the boat, the captain asked, who can speak French, who can speak English. Those are the two main languages that they focus on. And of course, we spoke Google Gaga, except SOS, things like that. So that's one of the aspect. I guess my life in Vietnam. I think one of the things that at least I tried to do back then is try to have a normal life. But I think try to live a more normal life. However, we face all kinds of those challenges, not only from the government but also I guess I guess in general in terms of the direction of our life. Just like I think good comparison would be the people in Ukraine right now. We sort of in limbo. We did not know what tomorrow might be, and so that was one of the reasons why I took the chance of leaving Vietnam. I think without needless to say, faith and religion was and family was the anchor that help us. But even with that, it's been controlled. So I think back then, the communists did not did not spell out the way they would govern us or how to open that. So I think recently, just like China, it tried to adapt. Trying to put on the new face of how human and how normal they might be in terms of the economy and whatnot, but obviously for its survival as well. So for us, I think the regular people, we try to adapt to what the new directions of this new regime here. And certainly for some of us, some of the young, we didn't have the media back then, but I remember one of the aspects that we try to do, and I think I might want to comment this time, is that trying to yearn for the Western, I guess, ideas or new things. I remember the first time I tried to, we didn't have a lot of books, so like Mao over in the policy of Mao over in China, controlling information is very important to the communists, as you can see now in Russia or wherever. And I remember as a kid, try to get access to books, and I love to read books, whether spies, movies. I shared with you last time, I love story about pirates until I really saw pirates. I said, I have nothing to do with that. It was too late. So I think I remember looking for books was so hard. One of those information books that have a lot of wonderful pictures. I remember under President Reagan, it talks about Star Wars. We're not talking about Star Trek, but Star Wars. And I seen how technology and how the images of, you can shoot things from the sky, all that was fascinating. And now owning all that material can imprison you. And so for us, I remember all the magazine or the books that I wanted. I know that I might be imprisoned for that just because of they think that I try to get westernized and who knows. I mean, they can cook up some charges against me. But as a young person, we love information. We try, like a sponge, we try to absorb that. But I remember couldn't find any books. There's no such thing as library. We would go to the book stand, and try to get the books, from that. And also too, the other thing too is that we try to listen to the BBC,
Mm-hmm.
broadcasting out, I think, Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the other one is Voice America.
Mm-hmm.
And those two, we had to listen in secret.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the neighbor or the communist authority walk by and see that you're in jail.
Mm-hmm.
I remember even Christmas music, we could not listen to Christmas music. So everything being controlled as far as that go. So that obviously stifle the growth, but when you yearn for something and long to study, absorb other information on the a different option of life, you try to look for that. So that's one aspect I know that I wanted it and missed it, but we still try to find different ways. I remember we have an old shortwave radio, try to get information wherever we could, realizing the neighbor or whoever can listen to it and report us. So I think that aspect was something that difficult for us. The other thing is the trust. I think one of the things that you see that whether in East Germany or even in Russia, China, is that you can't even trust your own family.
Mm-hmm.
They could report you. So for whatever reason, maybe to make a few bucks or maybe to get favor from the government. So for me, I remember as a kid, it was hard. Even my classmate, it's funny, we come over here, came over to Singapore here, they talk about bestie, best friend. There's no such thing as best friends over there. We're friends, but we don't know we can trust you yet. So they create that whole atmosphere of, one against the other, just like my dad. They move him around and try to test to see the faces, see any contradictory information. So there's a concentration camp for my dad, but the population also live in concentration camp to a certain extent. And so that aspect about trusting and whom you can trust, all that stuff was difficult as a kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now let's circle back again. So now we make it back to 1986. A South Korean tanker has rescued the people on the boat. All right. And now just continue your story from there. Once you're on board the ship, now what happens?
Well, I remember the time we climbed up the ladder, and for me, we never climbed up, a hanging ladder before, and of course we didn't have the energy to climb up. We were afraid some of us might even fall off and die, So thank God all of us was able to make it up there. And I remember the last picture I saw, obviously, for me it was salvation, like you coming from the dead. A couple of reasons. First, we know that we finally saved from the communists, because even when we were floating at sea, well, we still people without border. Anyone can pull us back or capture. So for me, that was a sense of security. I never felt that before. The other thing is that the sense of freedom, that we can feel free to say or to dream whatever we wanted to dream. I remember taking a quick look at the boat for the last time. That was the boat that saved me, that led me to this big ship, obviously in between people who helped that little boat. And we all saw it to the bitter end, and I think it was swallowed, under the wave, and then it was gone. So we came to this ship. It's almost like heaven. For me, first it's tall, and you're closer to heaven in that sense. But at the same time, we was all, seasick because of the smell of the boat, and didn't have anything to eat. And so most of us vomited. I don't think any of us didn't vomit. And then so they began, the captain began to take our names and all that, and gave us some. Remember, we was robbed and pirated, so we didn't have any clothes, or very little, and so they gave us things. And for me, it was wow. Even 10 Christmases in Vietnam combined. We never seen that, all that stuff. We didn't know what that was. So that was one. And then water, I remember that was, we didn't have water because we was given on the boat just enough, I think, about that much water to survive, just to wet your lip and live. And so I remember the first time we were able to take water, and I think the captain or somebody had to warn us not just take slowly, because otherwise we might have a system shock.
Right.
And then I remember drinking that. I can feel that water even till now going through my body and giving me life again, physically and mentally, symbolically, spiritually. It goes through, and I can feel that like a dying tree. It's our plant. It begins to liven up again. Now, the first technology challenge was hot shower and cold shower. Now, we was given a chance to take shower. We haven't had shower for days. I remember coming in there, looking at the shower. It said H and C. I don't know what H and C meant. And I saw the color too, right? Red and blue. But see, in Vietnam, we never had hot water. We could, but we had to cook it.
Yep.
And then you had to boil it. And we usually only use hot water when you're sick. So basically, I guess to do some sort of Chinese medicine that to get the bad stuff out. So you you cook, and then you sit in there with a blanket, and then you just drench. So I remember standing up there, and I was not alone with other people, because I think that's another thing too, sharing common bathroom with other one. I mean, most Asians are very private, and we just stood there, we stared at that, didn't know what to do, and finally, I think somebody from the crew came in and to tell us, here's a hot, here's a cold, and we tried to turn it and adjust it to the temperature. I remember one of the crazy boatmate of mine, I think he turned the hot, and boy, it was hot water come out, and we just like, what is that? So we got drenched. So that was the first, I guess, cultural shock, I guess, just using that. And then the next thing was food. And thank God it's a Korean ship. So the food was not quite dramatic. So they ate noodle and instant noodles and things like that for us. And we, obviously after many days, it's almost like a heavenly banquet. I remember that. And then of course, the first time being able to sleep, I think we share bunk bed, and I think they allow us to sleep in one of those quarters. And the first time I felt that was the most the most relaxing sleep that I had for days. And then the next thing was that they asked us to go see movie. It's a movie that over there we had to buy things. It's almost like, right now. I remember I came here in the 80 and the 90, and we had to deal with Blockbuster, and you go and rent all that. It's not easy, like you can download things on demand. So for us, wow, you can have a movie here. You have your whole movie set on this ship. So for us, it's like, wow. So I remember I think we saw the movie, I think it's at 2,000 feet under the sea.
So there's 20,000 leagues under
maybe
the sea.
Like 20,000, yeah. So something like that. Yeah. And I said, oh, great. Here we are on the sea. We watched a sea movie. But it was amazing, the pictures and all that. See, that was the beginning of color TV. And I remember that's technology changed, around the world. And I remember we were able to, some neighbor was able to get the color TV, and the rest of the neighborhood only have black and white. Obviously, we drifted away from the black and white TV, and of course those neighbors were disappointed. So anyhow, we saw how clear the movie was on that. the funny thing was that we wanted that experience on that ship forever, but we knew, and the captain kept us abreast about, in a day or two. So I think it was within a day and a half we were able to make it to the next destination. And the funny thing was he gave us choices, which one, Philippines, Malaysia, all that, and also in Singapore came up, and some people already knew how wonderful that place is. Singapore is considered the heaven of the refugee because of the treatment and whatever. I didn't know all that information. The other camps in Malaysia and Philippines, and to a certain extent in Hong Kong or Thailand, those are bigger camps, more crowded, and certainly the treatment was, I guess, it's not as good as the one in Singapore. So we told the captain, Singapore it is. And so he said, well, wonderful, because we're heading that way. And so we docked it, and I remember landing and then walking away from that ship. In some way, grateful and for that experience, but then now we had to say goodbye to some of the people we just make friends with, the people that saved us. And then I remember trying to, kneel on the ground when we first got off from the ship into Singapore, and we had a bus that took us to the camp. Now we didn't know. We heard about Singapore. We never know the condition or the type of camp. So I remember driving to this camp with a gate. I said, oh, great. It brought back memories about prison in Vietnam, because whenever I see gate and fence and all that, well, here we go again. So for me, I said, wonderful. I don't know about the other people, because I didn't know if they was arrested like I was. So took a deep breath, didn't know what tomorrow might bring, or, And then I remember they opened the gate and we drove through, and it was processed. We were processed in terms of paperwork and sign up. Now I was still minor, 16. I went alone, so I was grouped with other kids without parents, and we were put in the a house that we call that for orphanages, and it's orphanages. And then the other one with family or friends or bigger group of people that they know, they were divided and put in other houses. Now later I found out that camp was the former British barrack. So the British was in Singapore, so that was one of the military camps. And so it was set up like that, nicely. I think we had shower, bathroom, things like that. I think we wash our clothes and hang it on the strings and all that. And once again, we were sent to get our supplies and clothes and all that. And looking into this huge warehouse, and we have shoes and clothes. I was like, wow, this is another Christmas again. So for us, I remember, and most Vietnamese are small anyway. I remember some of us try on, and it looks like you drowse in the clothes. So that was an exciting thing for us. It's not like going shopping. And then for me, being the oldest in that orphanages, now the director of that camp is also the head of the orphanage. And he asked me to be in charge along with a couple other older kids, to take care of the kids and keep things neat and ordered. He wrote on the board the rule of the house. Here's what you need to do, the task every day, and things like that. And I remember one of the things that he spoke somewhat good English, but obviously he still has some accent. And he pointed, no gum, and we just like, okay, gum. And then that was the first thing I remember the taste of the Western taste is chewing gum.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, me, I chew a little bit. A lot of my friends, they chew that thing constantly. And the crazy thing, like most kids and the people, they just, spit it right on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, mm-mm. They said, no, no. And that how I thought it was just his personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
Now later on, when I lived there, I lived in the camp for, over 3 months while I was trying to contact my dad over here in America. And of course, I shared the last time I could not bring along any information because if I got captured and had my dad information, I can be in jail for a long time. So the only information that at least that I tried to learn was a couple of them, obviously my family home, but I also had to learn some of my relatives. So in case that they ask me the address and all that, I don't give my direct information. I would give my uncle,
Mm-hmm.
or when I get released, I would go there first.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember trying to, write back. I said, oh, great. Now I had to write back all the way to Vietnam. And back then, technology and whatnot, it would take months, at least a month, for information to get to Vietnam. And then we also knew that the communists, the authority, would open your letter. They don't have a scan. They will just open it. And then they might catch information. And I tried to write in a very vague way about my successful trip. At the same time, I tried to ask about my dad, and somehow must be a miracle that it got to my mom. And then she was able to write information about my dad, where he is
Mm-hmm.
in America, to me. Now, without that information, I probably just stay at the camp forever because there's no contact. So that happened a lot.
Okay, so I just make sure that we have this clear basis. So when you left Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
you had information that you memorized,
Mm-hmm.
and that's basically your own home address, but then the address of one or more of your uncles in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And then, but did you have any information about your father at that point?
No.
Okay.
We had, but we were afraid to write down.
Right. You didn't write it down,
Yeah.
but you didn't memorize
No.
that. Okay. So now you had to write back, and you wrote back to your mother, but you sent it to your uncle first? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, your uncle, was that one of the ones who had been a priest or a chaplain? Or?
This one is on my father's side.
Yeah.
My mom's side, those was a couple of chaplains.
Mhm.
Now they also was under persecution too, so
Yeah.
I didn't want to get them involved.
Okay.
So the other one is just live a regular life
Okay. Okay.
in around Saigon,
Okay.
but close enough so that they can pass information
Right. Okay.
to my mom.
Okay, so you're sending it that way, and then your mother actually, so the people in Singapore basically help you figure out how to mail something.
Yeah.
And
So that was another thing too about mailing. I had to learn the whole system on how to do that, and thank God they were able to give us some free stamps.
Mhm.
Obviously, without stamp, mail cannot go.
Yeah.
So that whole process of learning and with broken English and all that.
Mhm.
So thank God we were able to get that through.
Okay.
So for me, that was nerve-wracking because I really don't want to be in the camp, even though it's much better. I mean, it's like heaven compared to the camp in Vietnam that I was arrested at, re-education camp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you do that, and this process takes about 3 months.
It takes at least a month for the mail to go. Yep. So it's
Yeah.
closed around. Then I thought, oh great, it's gonna take forever, or it might not get to her.
Yeah.
And so that was, I remember waiting during that time was nerve-wracking, say the least, because now I made it out of Vietnam, I might just end up, nowhere, a person without any home.
Right.
And that could be, I mean, back then I think the way the immigration law goes, at least international, the only two countries that accept people without condition would be Canada and perhaps France.
Mhm.
America, unless you have some relatives and all that,
Mhm.
you cannot come. And I think the same with other countries, Australia for that matter.
Mhm.
So for me, that was difficult. In the meantime, we tried to, like the life in Vietnam, we tried to immerse into the life of the camp
Mhm.
and live as normal as we could. And, we had to take, I think, at least 3 days English classes. So
Mhm.
we went to take that. And
Right.
I remember we also was able to worship,
Mhm.
pray and all that. And then some free time taking care of the house, clean up, cooking and all that. So food, the experience of different food is
Mhm.
another thing that we had to go through, or at least I had to go through.
Mhm.
And then we had some of the benefactors, people who like to come to these camps to donate and help, especially orphanage like ours.
Right.
Yeah. So that's when I was able to meet one of the wonderful gentlemen. I mean, his name is Mr. Tan, T-A-N. He's an engineer of some kind, and he's a Singapore resident.
Mhm.
And he came, and he would take us out for a treat,
Mhm.
whether to go swim at a swimming pool
Mhm.
or go to a supermarket where they sell a lot of food. Now that was amazing experience because I thought I saw enough food because, but he took us to this mall, we
Mhm.
call it mall, and from one end to the other end, uh, you know, and we couldn't see the other end, food. It's just food. And we just like, wow, talk about heaven. We haven't experienced heaven yet. So we did some of that. And he also took us to go, to because in Vietnam they usually have like farmer market
Mhm.
or they have, street vendors. I
Right.
mean, that's the common things.
Mhm.
American GI knew that. But coming here, obviously there's some regulations and whatnot. So I remember going shopping for things. I don't know what else we need. We have almost everything, and we were at some of the vendor was able to speak English.
Mhm.
So we try our English too, and the system over in Singapore is similar to the system in Vietnam in terms of bargaining.
Mhm.
There's no such thing. They put I don't think there was a price. They would ask how much, and they would say, let's just say, a shirt they would say 50. And we don't want, so one thing about bargaining, I think that works also in South America, is that you don't want to disrespect the person and give it, they ask for 50 and you tell them 10. That's, really not good. They wouldn't like that. But if you tell them like 40, wow, you might pay too much. So we went back and forth on that. So for me, that brought back some memory, and that I guess make the adjustment better in terms of the life in Singapore. And so I think if there's one thing and about the life there, I thank God for people like Mr. Tan and some other benefactors. These are generous, wonderful people. They did everything out of the kindness of their heart. There's no gain, and so I'm always grateful for those people along the way, or the family that were able to rescue me when I tried when the attempt to leave Vietnam I failed. So for me, that gave me some hope. Those are the angels that I met. And I think when I lived there too, I was able to talk to other, people who left Vietnam to hear their stories,
Right.
see what they've been through. Boy, I was the luckiest one. Only a couple of weeks, less than 2 weeks. There was other that was stranded or floating at sea for a month.
Mhm.
They're talking about one was 1 month, the other one a month and a half or so. I said, how the heck can you survive that? And of course, many of them been through the experience like I have, met the pirates. Of course, the women got raped and all that. So I consider myself to be blessed. I seen God's hand, at work in my life that way. I think the other thing too during that time, beside that, was that we have to. One thing is about the Singapore, and I finally realized why they considered that camp better than other refugee camp, is that the United Nations came there. The High Commissioner came, and one of the things that they were able to give us was that I think couple of dollars, Singapore dollar, not American dollar, a day for living. We can buy food. We can obviously clothes. We already got donation. We can do whatever we want with it. And for me, I thought, wow, we able to acquire money, for ourselves. And obviously in Vietnam, it was harder, whether you had to work or you don't have money being given by the government. So going through that, so if there's one thing that I'm grateful for, I know the United Nations always, there's politics involved, and some people like it, some people don't like it. I am grateful for the High Commissioners of Refugees,
Right.
and they're the one that you hear that in all the conflicts, and regardless of how political that organization can be, I'm always grateful for that. They came and they helped us, give us that, and of course we managed to buy. With that camp, we had some freedom. We have curfew. I think we had to come back by a certain time. We can leave the camp certain time. We can go out and get food or whatever we want, take the bus, and then come home. So that there's that freedom. And the life at camp was normal in that sense. But I think it got tough when we had to get interviewed. I remember I got information from my mom, so thank God for that, but it took a couple months. But then being interviewed, it's funny, I don't know about all the process of coming to America, but we went through thoroughly. So I think we were asked, interviewed, why you left Vietnam and the reason and all that.
Now, were you being interviewed in order to get to America, or were they? Okay, so this wasn't being done just by the people in Singapore for their own sake, but so you basically, you found out where your father was from your mother. So the letter came back to you, and then at that point you have to try to get to the U.S. And so now you get interviewed by American officials. Okay.
And so it's never automatic because people always make it like, oh, you're a refugee, you can go. There's no such thing automatic. You had to make sure that you have the reason. First, you need to have somebody directly related,
right?
And if you don't, then there's other organizations like Bethany and other agencies that can help you, but that takes obviously longer. And for me, I remember I was interviewed, at least a couple of times, if I remember, or if not a few times. They just want to make sure, even though I was just a minor, so the process itself was intense in that way. And I shared with them my experience about life in Vietnam with the communists and all that. But unlike my father, who worked for the South Vietnamese, so I wouldn't say automatic, but he had, the asylum easier because, he fought. But for me, they always ask, why and all that. So I passed. I remember feeling relieved that I can see my dad that, here's another step, to be able to get to the, should we say, promised land. And so that was another intense process. And of course, saying goodbye to another. So that's one thing that I find and I share, in my priesthood as in my normal life is that I know how the refugees feel, and I think like people whose parents are in the military, you constantly change. You move constantly. There's no stability in that sense. And so I'm used to that. So remember being able to do that, and also my dad had to have pay for everything. So he had to sign that we won't, rely on Social Security, all that. He had to pay for the flight. That was back then was I think before it turned to Southwest. I think it was Eastern Airline. I think Eastern, to come here and being able to take that flight. Now, saying goodbye to those friends and people there was difficult too. Again, departure is always difficult, and I thought, I didn't mind living in Singapore, and also meeting other volunteers. A lot of wonderful people besides Mr. Tan. And there was some American retiree that wanted, to help refugee at the same time, being in a country that have the living standard in Singapore is quite high. I think back then, $1 American dollar can get $2 a Singapore dollar. So those people, and then also people from Australia, New Zealand that come over to teach and help. So I'm always grateful for those people, and I think Singapore is one of the things that I've learned is very disciplined society and very clean.
Yes.
Now I don't know people know much about that, but there was a couple incidents that made the news in America. One was when President Clinton was involved. There was a couple American youth that drew graffiti and vandalized property in Singapore, and boy, they wanted to cane them, and the President Clinton had to get involved. He couldn't even get it done for them. They got caned. I think, and then recently, the death penalty of that.
Yeah, and that was true. And I know one of the things about Singapore is they do have very strict rules about gum.
Yep.
So they meant it when they told you that.
And not only that, when we went out to the society, in Singapore, and we see sign, we didn't read much English, but we know littering is one of those, and not only fine a big amount, but if you repeat offender can be in jail. I said, in jail for that? So that gave me a different perspective. It's a free Western type of society, but boy, they write on you like, so by now, so that was something else that I was able to learn.
Okay. So what do you remember about the airplane flight?
Well, we had, that was another one because I think that was my first airplane flight. I don't think I ever flew before. So we didn't know that was another amazing thing too. We didn't know the connecting flight. So either, I think the way they told us, at least learning from other campers, refugee camp, in that camp, is that you either go from Singapore to Thailand, and then you make that connecting flight to either Hong Kong and then directly to America, or you can go from Singapore to Thailand, to Guam, Hawaii, and then you can go to San Francisco. Now my flight, we went from Singapore to Thailand, and then from Thailand we make the connecting flight to Tokyo, and then from Tokyo to San Francisco. So that was our destination. Obviously, there's other destinations in America, but that was I remember landed in Thailand, and I see it looks Asian, but the decorations, I felt at least was, I think, either Chinese or different, more different than Vietnam. And so we stayed there a little bit, able to taste Thai food on the flight. That was interesting, a little harder than I could tolerate. And then from there we landed in Tokyo. And even with that, I think we waited a little longer in Tokyo to change to fuel. But interestingly, from Tokyo to San Francisco, I remember that we changed the day. That was Thailand to Tokyo with same day.
Yeah.
But I remember the first time looking out the window to see, from day to night, and then see the sunrise. That was obviously we got some food at Tokyo when we flew there. Now the scene we were able to sit on the tarmac for a little bit. We didn't get off airplane, and seeing how organized and also clean too, like Singapore is Tokyo, just from our vantage point. And then coming to San Francisco, landing there. So it took, I think, over a day, I think, to get there. And I remember the first time seeing San Francisco and all these grass. I mean, it's there's a lot more scenic things to nature. But my first impression was, and now with you hear all the fire in California. Back then, we already saw how the drought affected. So that was my first scene of the New World in terms of how it looks. Obviously, a lot more high rises and whatnot compared to Tokyo and other places. So I landed there in San Francisco instead of LAX, a little less congested. And then from there, I remember, I think I flew either to Chicago or Detroit, and then of course coming to Michigan here, because that's where my dad was.
Yeah, so where in Michigan was your father?
He himself always wanted in this area here, Grand Rapids. A couple reasons. First of all, I think when he first came to America, from what he told me, he was supposed to have some relative that we had some family members that live either, I think, California or Texas. But for some reason, they moved, so it messed up the whole paperwork. And so here he had to, either he's gonna stay in the camp, and he ended up in Malaysia, which is tougher camps than mine in Singapore. So he had to, whoever that can sponsor him first. I remember one of the, I think either Bethany or one of the Christian organization, sponsor him. And so that's why he ended up in Michigan, because he didn't like the cold. I know most young people, we don't mind, but people like my parents' age, they'd rather be in California, Texas, Florida, and so he reluctantly ended up here. But one of the blessings that he shared with me was that in this area here, Grand Rapids and all that, there's a lot of churches. Even though it might not be Catholic church, there's some Catholic churches, but there's other churches. For him, with all the things that he went through with the war, and family and faith was very important to him. So he felt at home in West Michigan here because of all the churches. As a matter of fact, later he ended up buying a home for himself, which he was proud of, in Southeast Grand Rapids. And that's where I asked him why he chose that location. He said, well, because he could walk to churches. So a lot of refugees, you might know, is that they connect to the community of their own ethnicity or their own religion. And that gives them some stability and some comfort.
Okay. Now, was he able to get a job?
Yeah, he came, and back then he able to work for, I think, Grand Rapids Foam Rubber Company.
Mhm.
Now, other people would try to move up or at least get a job so they get paid more, or things like that. My dad, maybe because of the Vietnam War and whatnot, he's one of those that did not take the risk.
Mhm.
In other words, he felt at home with that, even though it's a difficult job in terms of caring and whatnot. But he didn't feel like, okay, maybe I should take a couple of courses in college, community college, and do something else or whatnot. But so, in some way, I think he's different from me. I'm one of those I love to take risks, not love, but I think I would take risks and after careful consideration, and I would do it just like I shared with you about why I took the risk of leaving Vietnam for my not only for my own future, but my vocation to serve the Lord and the people, the Catholic, the community of God. But for Dad, that was, and you know, I think I don't know if he regretted, but I think for him, it's give him more time to think about other things like his faith, his family. So I think he worked there for years before. I think only toward the end that he, after I think about 30, 25 or something like that years, that he finally retired from Grand Rapids Foam Rubber Company and started looking for other part-time job.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you got to so basically you came out here, and then did you join him when you got here? Yeah.
So I joined him. I think Dad was here, like I share, that most Asians don't like cold. I think I'm acclimated to the cold now. I would prefer the cold over the hot for some reason, and I don't mind the cold as long as it's not icy. I don't mind at all. But so I came here, joined my dad, and one of the things that I had to deal with was the language. So I think the language barrier was one of the difficult things for all immigrants. Trying to understand what they're asking. I remember, you know, people say, "How you doing?" And I know how to answer, "I'm fine, thank you." But it would take me, I think, 20-second delay. And by the time I could say, "I'm fine, thank you," they were about a mile away from me. And so that the language barrier was one of those things that I have to deal with. So I could not enter the seminary right away. So I attended Union High. Now, Union High School was the only school that able to provide ESL, or we call it English as Second Language.
Right.
And so I lived with my dad over on the southeast side, had to travel all the way to the west side. And I remember waiting for the bus. So I think I would wait for the bus like 6 o'clock or 6:30 in the morning. If for some reason I miss it, well, it's a long walk.
Yeah.
And then after school, the bus would take its own route. So by the time, I was always the last one. And I remember I never got home until 5 or 6. So I learned quickly how to manage to use that time on the bus to do my homework. So by the time I got off, I got most of my homework done. So Union High was quite an experience. I think the high school itself. So I will share with you and the audience about some of the other shock that I experienced. I mean, the cultural shock, the lifestyle shock, all that. But the first thing was a school experience. Now, over in Vietnam, the curriculum, I think, was dictated from the top down, principal, communist, whoever you want to say. It has a core curriculum that we try to do, study math, biology, chemistry, all those, physics, language. Now, in America, I remember first time going to Union High, and they asked me to pick the courses. Pick, I said. And they call that elective. I didn't know elective. Okay, elective. What is that? And because you know, like anything you so used to, people tell you what you do, whether communist or whoever. Now you have to tell myself on how to do that. That was quite an adjustment. And I said, well, what if I pick the wrong one? Or what I pick, now most of my friends said, I mean, one nice thing about Union High was we have a high number of Vietnamese, and some of them was Asian too. So they look Vietnamese, but not quite. But you know, so they've been in America for a long time. I don't know why they go to that school because the English is fine. So anyhow, so I was able. So they told me. I remember one of the kids said, "Hey, just pick anything, Vu." I said, "Well, pick anything. What if I pick wrong?" I remember struggling. I struggled through picking the courses. Other things too, such as able to have free lunch. Now, in Vietnam, we either walk home for lunch, or we bring something to school, or we buy something from the vendor of the gate of the school. But here we have free lunch, and you know the tray, and learning all that thing was overwhelming. In some way, I had some experience with that when I was on the ship, because those sailors have also, like, you know, they eat with the tray and all that. So I come here, going through the line. Now that was the first experience with, you know, the whole assembly line and all that. So sitting there eating with my friends and some other folks, and then of course, you know, the food. I mean, I talk about the shock. Food was another shock. I remember pizza. I was not able to eat pizza until I think about a few years ago in the seminary. The reason why is that I think now I'm so used to it, but how acidy I felt with the tomato juice that pour on that. So and cheese. We're not big on cheese.
Yeah, dairy products and things you would not have a whole lot of.
No, over in Asia. So that, and then of course we ate rice all the time. So coming there, going to school, and if you don't eat anything and you expect rice, well, good luck, you starve. And so that was another thing in terms of in terms of cultural shock. Dressing, I mean, that's another thing too. I think that over in Vietnam and all that, if you have a hole in your pants or wherever, you consider poor, because only poor people dress that. Maybe we look down, maybe we don't. It's just the way of life. But I came here, and all of a sudden I saw some of the kids have cut off jeans, and I said, are they poor? And some of my Vietnamese said, no, they're not poor. That's style, Vu. You pay big bucks for it. I said, are you kidding me? Well, in that case, let me cut some of my pants and I sell it to you. I mean, to them. Yeah. So that was another interesting things. Obviously, haircut totally different too, and you know, you see mohawks and all that. You know, kids in school, and then other things. You know, just a different way of going through school. But I remember one of the things that I found in my school experience was that, you know, even in Vietnam, we come to school to absorb the academic knowledge. We had some, they call phys ed here, physical education. But in Vietnam, the communists got us to stand outside a break, I think about 10-15 minutes through the day. We stretch out. That was about it. If you want to play ball or whatever, you play on your own. So organized sport. I remember there was a tournament between different classes on my grade. I think there were 10th grade. We have like about, I think, 10 classes. So just a tournament. And you know, I play soccer, or over there we call football all the time. And that was outside our academic thing, and you do on your own time. So we did that for fun, and I remember our class was able to get deeper into the tournament. We have a few good kids, and I scored a couple goals for them, by luck. But coming here, that whole organized sport, you know, even the phys ed time, what is phys ed? And I remember some of the Vietnamese who live here once said, Vu, yeah, you just come and have fun. Fun actually. You guys study hard, all that. So I remember they told me just relax, enjoy. So that was something difficult for me to get adjust to in the gym. You know, and a few other cultural shock. You know, the relationship between teachers and students different. I mean, over there, over Vietnam, man, the teachers, you know, I would, male or female, either the king or the queen in that sense. There's a lot of respect. You address them the right way. I remember some of our teachers went overboard. I remember one of the teachers, he got upset when we didn't have pop quiz like we do here, so we learned. But I remember I mean, he was so mad at one of the kids that did not study well. He slammed on the table, and I always like to sit in the front just because closer, you know, all that. And having to jump, I mean, right, I'm not kidding. He was so mad at the kid, he threw the whole his notebook outside the window, and I just like, wow. I see my parents get angry, but not like that. But see, over there is acceptable. Now coming over here, you know, the teachers, and I think they have a closer relationship in terms of friends and all that. But it took me a while to get adjusted to that. First, you know, addressing teachers, all that. You know, they very friendly and all that. There's no gap between the teachers and the student. The other thing too is that, you know, I think over in Vietnam, I think this is part of the cultural adjustment too, is that even though we have that gap, you can always come and talk to the teachers, you know, certain time. But over here, you need to make an appointment. And so you will find that, and I find that even in my own ministry, people, my staff at the church, you find out that people, whether Vietnamese or other ethnic group, they don't call. They will approach you in some event and they come and talk to you. The thing is that you do have appointments. You know? So some of those cultural shock adjustment, you know, for me, that was just the beginning.
Okay, so we've now gotten you to the United States, to Grand Rapids. You're in high school. What grade did you start in at Union High?
I already passed 12th grade in Vietnam,
Right.
And that was when I had to make the decision that because I'm on the blacklist and could not go on to college, even though I got good grades and top of the class. So coming here, thank God I was able to attend school first grade when I was younger. So in other words, I was the youngest in all my classes in Vietnam. So I came here and was able to study senior high or 12th grade one more year.
Okay, so you basically did 1 year of high school to make an adjustment. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you couldn't, at this point, go to the seminary yet, which means you knew at that point that you wanted to become a priest.
And yeah, I think so. So it's like any dream, you sort of have an idea. Okay, here's what, you know, maybe help people, maybe serve God, because I share with you that faith was one of the important anchors in my life through my tumultuous time beside my family. Certainly, you know, try to accomplish, try to give me a sense of self-worth. But it didn't reveal completely. So I remember my dad took me right away to seminary, and the rector said, you know, he tried to test my comprehension of the language, because one of the things about being a priest is that the first 4 years we had to go through just like all the regular college students, and we have other requirements from the seminary. And one of those requirements is philosophy. Now, good luck with that.
Yeah.
So I had some friend that later on they told me, Vu, even me who grew up in America, and we read through one chapter of philosophy, we have no idea what this guy was talking about. So after trying out or asking the rector, he said, maybe because he didn't want me to feel overwhelmed, swamped.
Right.
And besides, he said that, there's a lot of cultural things that you need to learn, whether I shared with you a little earlier about my experience in at Union High, is that food and the way of life here and so on and so forth. And so he said, why don't you try out high school? And so that's why I ended up in the ESL at Union High.
All right. Now, how far back had you made the decision that you wanted to become a priest?
So for me, and I think I know other people who've been through, I think, particularly I'm thinking of people in Ukraine, for example, who ever have been through tough times, especially war. One of the things you try to do is that the war either break you or make you become bitter, angry, and all that, or it will help impel you to do something about it, to make a difference in the world, whether helping others or creating peace. And for me, perhaps besides being a doctor or nurses, for me, the thing that really I felt that really helped change humanity, or at least share some of my experience, ease the pain of others, would be being a chaplain, being a priest. So that thought of helping others, and I didn't know the challenges of being a priest, whether the language or the courses I had to take, or other things I had to jump through in terms of being trained, just like basic training. You say has an idea about basic training in the military, but you don't know how much you get screamed at.
Yep.
So
Okay. So when you were a kid back in Vietnam, you didn't really have a plan that you were going to be a priest, and it would have been hard to become a priest in
You're right.
Vietnam because there were no seminaries
You're
and
right.
that kind of thing.
I think probably the other thing that I think it helped me shape my thinking of becoming a priest, or at least give it a more solid idea, would be role models. And I think I now as a priest, I talk a lot about that, whether when I baptize a child and I talk to the godparents, or when I coach. I have nothing to do, but I did have some time to coach at a school, because in those roles, whether teachers or coaches or priests, you have role models. So for me, the role model was my uncles, and so on my side, on my mom's side, there was 3 priests, and then I think my dad's side as well. So whether we talk about the influence of the French missionaries, or whatever, I guess the other thing too, or the family upbringing. When you're religious, you pray a lot. I mean, you tend to gravitate to that. But I think for them, I think they have the idea of, just like me, of serving others. And also too, I think like most clergy, whether in America here or wherever, whatever country, and I've seen that, especially in Vietnam, is that clergy is the most educated group. So I think for my uncles and and all that, to acquire a college or graduate education, priesthood is one of the ways. Obviously, you can be a doctor in another way, but for them, most priests they go through that high education. Certainly, it's not for free, but they themselves, those are more educated group, and that's why they chose, or at least they head in that direction. And I didn't know that process of discernment, but I remember they were my role models. Beside my experience of the war, that combined, that combined my thought process, or at least shaping me of how to go in this direction of being a priest.
Okay. And then, what seminary did you attend, or where did you go to college?
Yeah, so I think in Grand Rapids here back then there was, a college seminary right on Burton Street. So I think from there they didn't have enough candidates, so they moved it closer to Aquinas. So Aquinas back then, it was a house next to the college. Obviously Aquinas has some association with the Diocese of Grand Rapids.
Right.
and then they didn't have enough people either. So they moved to St. Stephen Church. It's an old convent, and the bishop, Bishop Rowe, who just passed away recently, he initiated that house, the old convent, and turned it into, they call it Christopher House. Now he could send us to other school, other seminary, to save costs, and but he wanted that the local. So I remember attending there at an old convent. There was only 5 of us, and it's an old convent, and I didn't know much about English. And I remember my friend knew that I came from Vietnam. We have a lot of ghost stories. So going to bed for us, here you read story like, I don't know, from a book. There it's being passed on in tradition. And so to help us sleep faster, we would, our parents or aunt and uncle would tell us ghost story. Well, once you hear that, you don't want to go to the bathroom, you just fall asleep. So I remember at Christopher House, some of my friends said, "Vu, there was a nun who died in your room," died in my room. So I remember a couple of nights I couldn't sleep. I mean, I just lay on my bed and then stare at the ceiling. And later on, the rector found out that that the kids tried to scare me, and so he said, "Don't listen to those crazy friend of yours." So I was there for a couple of years. So we would attend the formation. So we have certain sessions that we had to attend in that house, and then we walked to Aquinas College, and then some of us tried to take philosophy. Aquinas didn't have a lot of philosophy courses being offered, so some of us had to go to Calvin College, and then after that they asked us, the Diocese of Grand Rapids asked us to go outside the state. I don't know why, to attend, to get different flavor of college experience. Now back then we have 3 choices. If you know Spanish or want to learn more Spanish, you go to San Antonio, Texas, which we just heard a lot recently about shooting in Texas. And then you either go to another option on the East Coast, Seton Hall, or in my case, I chose St. Paul, Minnesota, University of St. Thomas. When I went there, it was just College of St. Thomas, and also it changed to University of St. Thomas. So I attended there for my last 2 years. And so they expected us, after the 2 years in Grand Rapids, we better do 2 things. We have certain number of credits that we had to fulfill, from philosophy to communication, all that. The seminary expected us. And then we also had to get our own major, and I didn't know. That was another thing, major. What is that? I'm in the seminary, what else you want me? And so I had to, pick my major. I remember that was another thing too. I always loved math and science, so choosing mathematics as my major is natural. But then I thought to myself, I took a lot of courses in philosophy, so I might as well major in it. It's sort of a daring experience, because you know that philosophy is not for the faint of heart. So I took that, and obviously we had to take certain history courses in communication.
Did you have to take, at the undergraduate level, Latin or Greek?
That was, for me, yes, we will ask you, but I think because of my learning English, so they sort of waive.
Okay.
But yep, we had to, later on in my, my years in graduate school, and later on, I decided to take, on the side, Latin, just to help me with a lot of document of the church.
Right, right.
Greek obviously would help too, but I think taking math courses, we deal with Greek a little bit, just the alphabets, I guess. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So when did you graduate from seminary then?
So I think I had to attend. I had everyone had to get a bachelor degree
Right.
in college,
Okay.
and then after that we either move on, to something else, or we can continue with our training to be a priest. So that's when I had to, make that decision too. And I remember my senior year, some of my friends at St. Thomas, they had to pick their career and whatnot. So I remember when the teacher said, "Well, I guess somebody else already picked your career." So I move on to the graduate school. That's when we focus a lot more on Latin and then theology, and then scriptures and whatnot. So that I have to, we move on to Chicago. So Mandalay or University of St. Mary of the Lake. I had to attend 4 years, but in the year in between now, back then they asked us to take a 1-year internship, and so a year in between I had to take off. I had to stop the school there and go back to be assigned at a local church. Now I chose St. Peter and Paul in Ionia. A couple of reasons. I think one was that beside the experience at the church, to see if this is what I want, the life I want, and then it's close to the prison. As you might know, Ionia is has the most prison in any town, and so it helps me have that prison experience. Go and visit. Now it's totally different culture.
Yes.
And then we also get trained in hospital. Now back then in Michigan here, there was only 2 choices in the hospital. We had to take get that experience, hospital experience at a general hospital. So the only 2 choices was one, I think, St. Luke in Saginaw, or it's kind of small, or Detroit. And for some reason, either consulting with my advisor or whoever, they didn't think that would be good enough. So I had to apply around the country. I remember I applied New York, California, even Hawaii. I said, well, what the heck? To Hawaii, even though I don't know anyone over there. And whoever called first, and I was called to go to do a hospital in Oxnard, close to Santa Barbara. So it's north of Los Angeles. So I was there for 3 months. Quite an experience over in California, Highway 1 and all that, and dealt with a lot of motorcycle, accidents, and how to help the family. So as a chaplain in the hospital, I would be the buffer zone between the doctors and the hospital staff and the family. So I'm there to provide comfort, counseling, and communicate all that, and deal with triage and all that. And when I was, my prison experience was another eye-opening experience too. I've learned a lot from that. I didn't, there was one time we had a fight in the prison, and they organized that. They named me a couple members, and everything just shut right down, and we said, that's it, we're gonna be here forever. And there were some weapons, but nobody got hurt or killed. And I was with another priest, and so I remember that priest, we were in a very small room, the library, and that's where we pray and worship. And so when everything shut down, it was like sardine. I mean, we got stacked in there. And priest told the I think the culprit came in and asked for forgiveness from him. He said, he looked at him very sternly, don't do that again. And so it took us a while, I remember, for hours before we could get released. And I continue to visit those people in the prison. It's hard because on the one hand, in the Bible, in my faith tradition, we challenge you not only love our neighbor, love our enemies, and try to turn the other cheek. Now, the prison culture is totally different, even though I already had that experience in Vietnam. And, they would use me as a visitor to uh, to bring stuff that being banned, whether to become a transporter for them. And I told them many times, I said, that's not gonna work because I'm here for your spiritual nourishment and all that. I'm not here to do that. And besides, it's illegal. If I get caught, not only me get jeopardized, this whole thing will be gone. And so for me, it was a good experience to see how those people think, and at the same time challenge my faith to turn the other cheek, or at least reaching out to people who, guilty or not guilty, that I need to serve.
Yeah. I guess in a prison like Ionia, they've been convicted of something if they're there. This isn't a jail where they're waiting trial.
Yeah. So I was able to serve both. So there was a jail, so the waiting period, and that was another thing too, because some of them, either they got released from the jail because the trial doesn't last.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't last long. All of a sudden I saw them back again. Said, why are you back here? So some of them cannot survive outside. So that whole thing that we talk about, how to revise and the prison culture, and how to get them immersed into society. That's I think that's important as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. They're going to go back to your story. So essentially, you finished your undergraduate training, then you had to take a year off, and you spent most of that in Ionia, and you had your 3-month stint out in California at the hospital. So you've done all of those things, and then from there, you basically go to the colleges. That's like on the North Shore of Lake Michigan, north of Chicago.
Yep. So I think we call it Mandalay, but most of us we call it Fundalay. So it's close to Milwaukee. So we, sometimes we go up to Milwaukee just to visit Six Flags. We didn't have time to stop by to see everything about Milwaukee on that.
Yeah. Well, I guess Six Flags is still in Illinois, but it's right up in that area.
Yeah. So I think when we pass that, we know that we're close to Milwaukee. And so our seminary was right close to the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. Right. And sometimes, I'm one of those, I'm open to those adventures, and I remember some of my friends would, drive up there, and I remember we didn't have time, so they told us to roll out, to stop by the famous Milwaukee brewery. So we rolled out the windows, and we inhaled the brewery. That's all the time we can have, and then we rolled right back.
Right. Now, at this point, did you know how to drive?
Yes. So I think that's another thing too about cultural different shock. I think learning how to do that was something else. I think we're not allowed to own things under the communist country. I was able to have a taste of driving when I was in Singapore, and of course I remember Mr. Tan would tell us, we're not in Vietnam here, because the Vietnam drive on the right like here in the French, and they asked us to drive on the left. But yeah, so we had to get all that, the basic stuff like an American in terms of driving and all that. I remember here's one experience about the challenges that I began to run into, is that talk about discrimination, and I know that's one of the things. So one of my friends owned a stick shift, and so when I was in at Aquinas. Now there's a neighborhood in the close to Aquinas they call it East Grand Rapids. It's very up and up. Now, nothing against those folks, but very quiet. So we didn't know. We said, well, maybe we just take the car down there because it's quite, less traffic. We can learn how to drive stick shift that way. Well, if you don't know how to drive stick shift, it's hard. And I was, of course, you need to put the clutch in at the right time, all that. So make long story short, I stalled the car so many times. All of a sudden, out of the blue, we got surrounded by cop car. And we said, what did we do? I think, first we stalled and we just tell the traffic just, pass us. Well, somebody called. And so we were surrounded by first, marked cop's car, and then even unmarked, and we didn't know. I mean, we was, a little freaked out. And they said that, what are you doing here? I said, well, we just learn, learn how to drive stick shift, but, we just stalled. And so they questioned us to make sure that our story, match. I'm a friend who tried to teach me that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they said, you're not allowed here. And they kicked us right out. I'm not kidding. And some of those people believe that later on, because I was assigned, I would be assigned to Immaculate Heart Mary, Immaculate Heart Mary Parish, which is right in the East Grand Rapids.
But it's not quite. Well, it's in Southeast
Yeah.
Grand Rapids. Yeah. Although actually, your dormitory where you live, St. Stephen's, is in East Grand Rapids. Yeah. So you lived there,
Yep.
and but they didn't want you to drive there.
Well, they basically said, you're not allowed in this neighborhood. I'm not kidding. So I think talk about discrimination. So
Yeah.
that's when I try, one of the things I try to do is try to see the goodness in everyone, at least try to, and that's part of the upbringing, and also I think I grew up with a lot of Buddhist friends, and we have that Confucianism. I mean, that's basically a way of life. It's not it's just a philosophy.
Right.
And we learn to live in harmony with different religion, natures, all that. Don't kill, all that stuff. So for me, that was an eye-opening, and as far as a personal experience, and I didn't know, why we got kicked out. We didn't challenge, we didn't ask, and that was just one of the few incidents. And I never held anything against anyone, but because people ask, even when I was at Union High, now that was very diverse community. We have Latinos and all that. I remember some of the kids there, and it's interesting. People always think that discrimination only come in the form of the white people against the black or other color. Well, it come in different form. I mean, even when I was, that's why I think it's when we talk about trying to solve that problem, and Black Lives Matter, all that, and I support all that, but it comes in the other way too. And I remember when I was at Union High, some of the African American students who obviously live here, and so they felt, I guess, superior in some way. And I remember some of them said, so they asked me, where you from? So I'm from Vietnam. And they call me, at first they didn't know that I was from Vietnam. They call me Jap. I didn't know what Jap means.
Yeah.
And so they said, go home. I said, go home. Where we are supposed to go? So I got discrimination against me by African Americans, and you see that, some other incident that happened, that hate against Asian, it's not just come from, the white folks and, Anglo, it's come from even African American. So I think when we talk about trying to solve that, I think we have to be honest about, I think in many ways, it's in a lot of us who, for some reason, feel threatened or whatever, just ignorance, I guess.
Yeah.
So I never held against that, or even when I serve at the Home of Veterans and other nursing, because that's part of my ministry, and go and visit. I remember when I was in Ionia too, that internship year, and so I went to visit a nursing home nearby, and one of the elderly gentlemen who evidently served in World War II in the Asia Theater. And so you can see what he's seen, experienced, and some of his friends were treated badly by the Japanese. And we think that he didn't know is that when the Japanese was in the conqueror in Asia, I heard from my grandparents and all that, I mean, they treated not only the American bad, Chinese and Korea.
Everybody.
Yep.
Yeah, they were very bad guests.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I remember, a lot of, so I think millions of Vietnamese died starvation because they want them to serve, I guess, turn the, instead of growing rice and all that, you grow, I think, the things that make military war, I think the bags and all that.
Yeah.
I remember my grandparents and great-grandparents said, they would rather be under the occupation of the French or American, whoever, not the Japanese, believe it or not, even though they look like us. So I think in terms, so anyhow, back to the story. So this gentleman here, so my pastor said, so how was visit there? I said, he never talked to me. And the pastor said, strange, because he talked to me all the time. And later on I found out through the staff and through the pastor, and I put the two and two together. He thought I was Japanese. And later on, I think after the end of my year there, he found out, and we talked, and he finally learned that I'm Vietnamese. And so I don't know, I can't remember how much story I told him about the Vietnamese suffer under the Japanese occupation, all that. But I think we make peace then. But that's part of the experience that he had. So that in terms of besides cultural differences that I had to deal with, I faced some of that. And I'm one of those that I try to make the world better. I don't use that. And even when I disagree with things, I don't pick up the gun and start shooting or kill and hurt people. I think that's just ridiculous, I think. And for me, I think one of the things that I forgot to mention about America. So when I came here, America was like a shining city on the hill, like President Reagan said, like the Atlantic city. And I don't think that my image of that, was, shattered in any way. Maybe it's more to reality. I think there's certain ideals that still good. And so for me, in the seminary, beside discerning my vocation, this is what God called me. I also know that internally, I have that internal fight, that struggle, fight down my own identity. Because for me, I like to combine the good in both culture. I try to discern, what good in my Asian culture and what good in the American culture, the Western. And that was, through the experience, through the struggles, I tried to pick certain good things from each culture and assimilate into my own. And those are the principles I live by until this day, 25 years being a priest. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So when did you finish at your graduate work?
Yeah, so I was ordained, finished that in 1997.
Okay.
So that's when I graduated with my class. So I began with one class, but that group moved on because some dioceses did not need the whole year.
Okay.
So I had to join another class, that didn't know. So thank God I have a couple of friends from Denver. So Denver, Colorado require a year or two. So we become, 2-3 of us become our support to join the new one, the new group of classmates. And so I graduated in 1997, ordained, and I've been there 25 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then where were you assigned after you were ordained?
Yeah, so I think the first parish I was assigned was Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish, right on Burton and Plymouth. And then from there for over 2 years, after about 2 years, I was assigned to St. Patrick in Portland, to Lansing. So before you can get to MSU, you had to pass by Portland. So I had to learn how to cheer for the team there as well as the MSU, go green, go white. And then was there for 2.5, little over 2 years, to different experience. I think the people, they're very laid back, more or less rural community. And their main thing is sport. So, and then from there they moved me to Belmont, close to Rockford. And I was there the longest, so I was there for 14 years. And so I remember trying to come up with a pen name, so when I write an article, I asked people to call me the Fresh Prince of Belmont. And then from there, I was moved to Muskegon, North Muskegon, Whitehall, for I think a year and a half. And then I got moved back here to Kentwood.
Okay, and what church are you at now?
I'm at St. Mary Magdalen Church.
Okay, all right. Now, during what period were you doing your volunteer work at the Home for Veterans?
Yeah, when I was in Belmont, we have another priest that served in the prison ministry, and he also served, I think he switched. That's when I served with him in Ionia. and then he switched to the Grand Rapids Home of Veterans, and he retired. So he said, wow. So I was debating again, discerning on what I need to do besides serving my faith community, anything else I want to take on. And he said, you know, they need a chaplain there. And with me, with the background I had as a refugee, and especially the Vietnam, back then there was a lot more World War II and Korean War.
Right.
And so I said, sure, you know, like I think I'm one of those that I dare and challenge myself. I didn't know what that entailed. So back then we had about 800 members. And now I think the home only had about a little over 100. But so he said, you know, we need somebody to do that. I said, so he said, tag, do it. So he retired, and I've served there for 11, almost 12 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, how much, let's see, I guess let's get in another angle on something you had talked before, written about. Your father came to America, and then you came to America. What about your mother and the rest of your family back home? What happened to them?
Yeah, so I think that was, that's a good question. I know in the seminary that was probably one of the toughest things, when half of my mind tried to serve God and half my mind worrying about the family. And you know that some people, they had to drop out of school and to work and to help family.
Right.
And the same with in the seminary. So for me, I guess I struggled with that as well. My dad knew that he wanted me to complete it. So he had to sponsor my mom and the rest of my two sisters over here to America. And so I think they came, I remember this is under Senator Cal Levin, and I had to write the process, as you know, paperwork for immigration, you know, even though with a spouse direct link like that, it still takes time.
Right.
And I remember I had to write a letter. I think that was when I was in I was in the last year of college and beginning of the theology of graduate school. So I had to write a letter to Senator Cal Levin, who passed away, so God rest his soul, to ask him to help speed up the process or use his influence. And he wrote back, I remember that, so I'm grateful for that. So the process took, you know, quite a few years. And then I think my mom came over, I think my last year or so, or my next year, the last year, so at my junior year of graduate school. So they took that long, about 4 or 5 years, 4 years.
So how long had your mother and father been apart then?
Yep. So they've been apart a long time. First, they've been apart 12 years when he in
Right, and
the
then he'd come home
come home,
briefly. Right.
briefly for only a year or two.
Yeah.
And then after that, you know, he had to take off, had to leave.
Yeah.
And then didn't see each other for years until later on, I think. And he passed away 5 years ago. So that's one of the reasons why I asked to be closer to her, take care of her. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So
Yeah.
that
And now, did your sisters come out as well?
yes. So they came with my because they didn't have family. That it would be complicated if they married over in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And that would either they had to make the decision to stay over there, or some paperwork had to be done separately, I think, because they not directly, you know, with the family, with my mom. So they both were not married, so they can't come here.
Okay.
With mom.
All right. Now, how much connection do you have with the Vietnamese community in the Grand Rapids area?
You know, interesting you asked that. So that was another thing, another struggle that I think, I talk about searching for identity. I'm one of those that I see the goodness in both the Asian cultures and the values, along with what I see in the Western culture, the value as well. You know, both of them are not bad, but they have the good thing and the bad things. And even when I was in the seminary, I always tried to use a summer beside working 2-3 jobs. I tried to help out with the Vietnamese community, because partly you will see that in a lot of other community as well, is that they struggle with their own identity,
Mm-hmm.
whether they would, assimilate themselves into American society, or would they still hold back and say, let's just say that they just stay with the Muslim community,
Mm-hmm.
or with the Vietnamese community, and had nothing to do with
Right.
American culture.
Right.
And I see that in a lot of culture. As a matter of fact, when I was in Chicago, and they talk about that, whether the Polish or the
Mm-hmm.
Italian, they said you don't need to learn English because
Yeah.
everybody that speak the language.
Right.
The same thing with the Hispanic right now in Chicago. And for me, I think there's a good and bad in each culture.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so I try to balance that. So I try even help them out. And my first 2 years being a priest, I travel, 1 hour each way from here to at least back then. There's another Vietnamese community in Holland,
Mm-hmm.
and those folks travel along like Muskegon and all that.
Mm-hmm.
There's other Vietnamese community here in Grand Rapids,
Right.
but it's being served by another Vietnamese, so they don't need anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so the church asked me to help and serve there. Now, back then my Vietnamese is a little better than now, just
Mhm.
because I could speak like any language. If you don't use it, you
Yeah.
lose it. And so I was able to practice my Vietnamese back then as well.
Mhm.
But I remember I was right at the threshold of not being able to speak Vietnamese well, because I tried to emerge, or at least speak American, the English better. I
Mhm.
tried to focus on that.
Right.
I remember trying to translate and some jokes, and like any language, the first thing that that you master the language, you can tell a joke.
Yeah.
And I remember trying to translate the American jokes to the Vietnamese when I preached at the Vietnamese community in Holland, and I could not. And I remember some of the elderly Vietnamese who sat in the front. They look at each other and look at me like, yeah, this guy is hopeless. But one thing that they do give me credit for is that my sincerity, that I did my best, and I
Mhm.
gave you all. So they appreciate that. So for me, and you see, and with due respect to other colleagues of mine, Vietnamese and all that, I don't detach myself from the community. I see some good values in it, but I live in America here, so
Mhm.
I wanted to immerse as much as I could into the community here, the American society.
Mhm.
And the values I know that I'm talking about is this. I know with the Asian community, obviously, the nuclear family is important. You were talking about one home can shelter 2, 3 different generations.
Mhm.
Now you don't see that in the Western. So that whole common good,
Mhm.
that whole family in many generations is important. I see the goodness in it. The whole thing about discipline,
Mhm.
that whether we learn that because the communists make us, or we learn that through our culture, that we
Mhm.
always discipline this way and that. Now, there's a few other values, such as I guess traditionals, and tradition is always, we always do this, like the Lunar New Year's. We always honor the teachers, and the parents and I think whether we talk about the church institutions, I think so. So over in Asia, and institutions are very important. Whether we talk about in terms of the language or addressing, you need
Mhm.
to know whom you address. You don't just call everybody you.
Mhm.
You never hear the end of it, and so things like that. Now in America, that I see the value, would be the whole openness,
Mhm.
that we try to accept, or we welcome any ideas. Can be crazy idea for that matter. For that, certainly that whole thing about opportunities. The sky's the limit. If you work hard, you can do anything you want. And I think individual thoughts, so I decide what my life will be like. I don't need to. So for me, when I enter the seminary, my vocation is not just for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's about my family, what about the community. So I go to bring not just honor the name for my family, but also I do all that to help serve the community. Now, obviously in the Western culture, individual come first. What I decide about myself, my body, my future is me.
Mm-hmm.
You may be able to influence me or talk about that, but that would be aside. So all that, the whole the clash between the two cultures and finding my own identity, along with discerning my own vocation, whether this is what I want. So what's inside me, it's not that simple and easy. Like, okay, well, let's go to, pick all this. And I myself, in some ways, I thank God I was able to see both worlds. And I know some of my friends, some of my Vietnamese colleagues, for example, priests, some of them, they would not go and do a Vietnamese mass. I don't know why. And I know their parents belong to that community, and I go and serve that. Others, they would serve the Vietnamese, but they have nothing to do with the American culture, or they don't want to assimilate into it. From food to everything else, the culture and all that. So for me, I think those two extremes break down society, or at least, create that whole division and pull everyone apart in that sense.
All right. Now that basically gets to the material that I wanted to cover for the purpose here of my project. But to kind of close out, there is one other subject I know is important to you. I'd like to talk a little bit about. I mean, we are now in the year 2022 witnessing at a distance a war of Russia invading Ukraine. That's created huge numbers of refugees and untold amounts of suffering in different kinds. When you see all of that news, I mean, how do you respond to that, or how do you relate to it?
Yeah, very difficult. I know the first day, February 25th, when Russia invaded, I knew that he would, just because I do keep tab of that, just partly for my education, but partly you see, I guess, world events. And I remember, the first week or so, I could not even sleep because it brought back a lot of memory when you been through some experience, traumatic like mine, and you seen this whole thing happen in Russia, in Ukraine, and that you automatically, your survival mode turned back on. So I remember, seeing those little ones, having to leave the country, and I saw myself in it, and I preached about that in the last couple of weeks when the readings of the church lend themselves to the occasion. So I asked one of the things that was, I remember last week I talked about my congregation. How did people, if my congregation thought about what those little ones pack in that little bag of theirs. So I asked them that question because when I left Vietnam, believe it or not, I switched back and forth between first some food and then some clothes and then maybe some medicine because that might help me, or Band-Aid, without causing the attention of the authority. And because if you go, they can search you anytime, and they see that, or if somehow they see something, you cause attention, you get arrested. So finally, after talking to family and praying all that, I decided to bring only my faith in Jesus, and also enough money for the bus fare. That was it. So I didn't even bring, I shared with you earlier, I didn't bring the address because if I get caught, in big trouble. Yeah. So I asked the congregation about it. What did you, I asked them if they ever thought about what those kids pack in that little bag. And you know, I asked them, maybe they brought some food, some drink, maybe some, you know, stuffed animals, maybe, you know, some crayons and whatnot. What did they pack? So I was always curious about that. But the face of those little ones, like when you at that age, when you young, partly you naive about what might be in front of you. You don't plan ahead. You live by the moment. And so, like they say, you know, ignorance is bliss. And so, in some way, those kids being prevented from seeing what's going to happen now, you know, because the war, as you and I see, it might drag on for months. But, you know, I remember I couldn't sleep, and I didn't know why. Maybe I was worrying about something else. But it brought back a lot of memories, and certainly, you know, those families that being, you know, had to migrate from their home country to some place else. My folks, my parents had to migrate from the north to the south, and then of course that, and then over here. I migrated, thank God, only once, but still difficult for me. But the war itself really, I wouldn't say that make me angry so much as very, you know, it turned myself upside down in terms of the values that our leaders, you know, our world leaders have these days. I think one of the things that I talk to, you know, our political leaders sometimes, I talk to my friends, is that I think if they would learn history, if they would master history, they would read that. And that's one of the things that I thank God you know, like a lot of subject, people think that it's a boring thing, you know, thing happened in the past or what. But as I grown older and been through the Vietnam War, I love history. I read about, you know, Genghis Khan to, you know, Napoleon, all that, World War II, so that I can learn how leaders dealt or make decisions and how humanity was being treated. So for me, if our leaders would learn history, would, you know, read or at least, you know, consult, you know, that. So the same thing with the Bible. I mean, you read the Bible and you see the same thing that being taught in one chapter. Hey, I thought I read another chapter before, another book. It's the same thing, you know, we just repeat that. Some reason we didn't learn. So for me, I don't know if I'm angry so much. Well, maybe in the beginning I want to go, maybe I was kidding with my staff, maybe I need to pick up the gun, go there and defend. Just because, I mean, when I was a kid, I couldn't do that. But now, you know, when you see injustice or something that you could. But I think the war itself make us wonder about how people think about treating the other person or how they themselves view their power. And I think a lot, as you might know, in human history, there's a lot of ruthless leaders. That's how they get to. That's how they get to that position to begin with. So your life and my life might not mean a thing to them, and so we just become like another pawn, another stepping stone for them. So that war itself certainly, you know, create some anxiety or at least uneasiness on my part about the world we live in. I think the other thing too is that evil. I think obviously one of the things that I try to help people see that evil does exist. And now I talk to some of the missionaries and friends, and they, you know, the Bible talk about evil, how Jesus drove evil spirit, you know, out of a lot of people. Now we can call it, you know, psychological problem or whatever. But I talked to those missionaries who've been to other parts of the world, Africa. I mean, that's where a lot of, where the faith is very strong. It's just like in Asia, but or South America. The only thing is that over there, there's that little, I guess, sense of voodoo or you know, cultural thing. And so for them, evil is real, but they mix it with that. So I try to highlight to people that hey, evil does exist. It might look like you and me, but but it's certainly done a lot of wicked things
Yep.
that harm people, destroy life, and so there's no value for any human life except theirs.
Right. Yeah. And I suppose one somewhat reassuring thing is the degree to which much of the world responded negatively to what the Russians were doing, and they recognized that it was bad, and there is substantial international pressure, at least, because there's recognition that really in a modern civilized world, these things should not happen, and a country should not do that, which doesn't stop people from doing it anyway. But the degree to which this seems strange maybe tells us we've made a little bit of progress. I mean, I teach military history. I study warfare, all its eras. The more you do, the more you realize how bad it is. But you can recognize now that in a couple of centuries ago, or even a century ago, you fought wars to get things for your nation or yourself, and killing people and destroying things was just a normal activity.
You're right.
And today we often look at that differently, and from our point of view now, it at least is a bad thing. Yeah. And I think that probably makes a good point for me to conclude this session. So thank you very much for sharing your story with me.
Thank you, Professor Smith. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and share with our audience my personal experience about the Vietnam War and my journey here as a priest, and hopefully continue to serve the people of God and and the world in my own capacity.